Hello, welcome to the final exam overview part one. And I'm just going to go over the units and these specific numbered questions I've asked you to summarize in your notes. Okay. So I'm going to give you like kind of short summaries, and then if I need to, I'll give some context around my short answers, mostly for your sake. And I might split this video in two depending on how long it is, but it'll be an optional video for any of you who are looking to get some extra work in. Okay, so let's begin. Unit 1 is about desire and natural revelation. We're going to start right here with this first question. We'll start going down the list. Okay. What does every person have built into them? Everyone has a desire for God. If it's everyone, we'll say the desire for God is universal. It's also a desire for infinite truth, goodness, beauty. And then question number 2, where does this come from? Because there's no corresponding satisfaction in the natural world, our universal desire must come from something outside the universe. Does that make sense? We have an infinite desire, but this is the only one of our shared natural desires that the natural world can't actually satisfy. So where does it come from? The answer is it's got to come from outside of this universe. Number 3, what does this desire cause in us? Okay, infinite desire can't be satisfied with finite things. So we're restless until we rest in the infinite God who put the desire in us. Again, infinite desire can't be satisfied by finite things. Like endless desire can't be satisfied by things that end. So we're restless until we find the infinite God. Number 4, how does desire reveal something about God? The answer is we reflect our Creator in an imperfect way. If God put a desire in us, he must desire us infinitely and perfectly more. So we reflect God in an imperfect way. And if he put a desire in us for himself, he must have a desire for us that's perfect and infinite. All right, let us move on past the C.S. Lewis quote into Unit 1, Lesson 2. Why is desire a key component of knowing God? Desire is a piece of data that's inside of us, and we can't ignore it. Whereas there's other data, pieces of evidence, converging clues in the world, but we can ignore those. None of us can ignore the desire for something that nothing in this world can satisfy. What are natural desires? Natural desires come from within our nature, and therefore they can be satisfied by nature. They're universal and have a corresponding state of deprivation. So again, what are natural desires? They come from our nature, and nature, the world, can satisfy those desires. They're like food. If I have a desire for food, the world must have a way to satisfy that desire. Otherwise, where would that desire come from? Now, each of these desires that are natural, that are in me, like for food, they have a corresponding state of deprivation. That means if I have a desire for food, there's the pain that I experience when that desire isn't fulfilled. So when my desire for food isn't fulfilled, it's called hunger. And you can think of other natural, like I have a desire for rest. When it's not fulfilled, I'm exhausted. So each natural desire has like an experience that we have when we don't have that desire met. Okay, number 3. What does our desire for love, that should say something different. Why does our desire for love not make sense? Okay, this goes back down to the question of like the infinite. All right, but let's talk about this. We desire infinite love that's free, total, faithful, and fruitful. There's no corresponding human experience that perfectly fits that. We don't just desire to be liked or loved a little bit. We have this ache for an infinite love that's free, freely given, that's totally given, that's faithful, and it's fruitful. It gives us life, and it creates life. It creates new things. There's nothing in this world that's perfect, a perfect satisfaction of that. Next, what are artificial desires? Artificial desires are desires that come from outside of us and are not shared by everyone. Artificial desires would be like Apple markets an iPhone X. Suddenly I see that and I want it. That desire didn't come from inside of me, it came from outside of me. And so therefore not everyone wants an iPhone. They don't have a corresponding state of deprivation. Meaning, when I don't have that iPhone, there isn't an iPhonelessness that I experience. And definitely I didn't experience that before it was marketed to me. Whereas food, from the moment I'm born, I have a hunger. And if my natural desire for food isn't met, I experience starvation. Okay. Number 5. What is the argument from desire as a syllogism? A syllogism is a set of premises that lead to a conclusion. And if the premises, the main points, are true, then the conclusion has to be true. So it's a way of setting up like an argument. So let's talk about the first premise for the argument from desire. So P1, premise 1, is every natural desire corresponds to a real object in nature to satisfy. Every natural desire corresponds to a real object in nature to satisfy. Premise 2, in each of us is a desire that nothing in time or earth or any creature can ever satisfy. So P2 again, there's a desire in me that nothing in time, earth, or any creature can ever satisfy. If P1 and P2 are correct, then my conclusion has to be correct. Therefore, conclusion, there must exist something more than time, earth, creatures to satisfy. Whatever this something is by definition God or life with God forever. So conclusion is there must be something more than time, earth, or creatures to satisfy. The something is God or life with God forever. Cool. All right, Unit 1, Lesson 3, Science and Reason. So let's talk about these 3 questions really quick. How do we distinguish between science and reason? Science is systematically observing nature to understand how it works. It is a restriction of reason because it limits reason to truths that can be demonstrated. Therefore, reason is bigger than science. So science is the restriction of human reason to a certain kind of truth that can be demonstrated through like experiments. But reason is much bigger than science. Okay. Number 2, what's the modern error when it comes to science? We call it scientism. It's the belief that the only things that exist are those that can be provable by science. But our reason tells us that this is like logical. It doesn't make sense. It's not how we live. Again, scientism is a belief that the only things that exist are those that can be provable by science. So therefore, like, human love doesn't really exist. What can be observed by science is chemicals and hormones, things like that. So scientism is what happens when we reduce everything down from reason to the scientific method. Okay. Number 3, how does science aid our search for God? Our reason can take scientific discoveries and make reasonable inferences that provide converging and convincing arguments for God. So our reason again is bigger than science, can take the very awesome things that science can demonstrate and explain about the world. And we could take those things and from those things make inferences that give really good converging and convincing arguments for God's existence. All right, let's jump to the homework assignment, questions 1 and 2. Okay. Question 1, Explain what ancient philosophers concluded. Explain what ancient philosophers concluded apart from divine revelation. All right. Ancient philosophers like Plato or Aristotle came to conclude through reason alone there's got to be a God who is one and the first cause and is eternal and perfect. So apart from revelation, apart from Christian religion, philosophers came to the conclusion that there must be a God who is one, who is the first cause, eternal and perfect. Okay. Number 2, what are 4 characteristics of the kind of knowledge we have about the Creator through reason? Let's see. Through human reason, all the knowledge we can learn about God through reason is mediated, meaning it must come from other natural things. It's natural. It's universal, meaning everyone has access to it. It's not like limited to only a few people because everyone has human reason. It's certain and easy to attain. Like you can know for sure that there is a God, and that knowledge, if you're open to it, is not difficult for anyone to approach and understand. Okay, so all knowledge of God through reason is mediated, meaning it comes through other natural things. So that's 1. Number 2, it's natural. Number 3, universal. And number 4, all the knowledge is certain and easy to attain. Okay. Unit 1, lesson 4. We are trucking along here. How does creation reveal the Creator? The way a writer reveals meaning on pages of book, God writes through people, places, and events in history. Okay. And there's other ways that you can word that, but it's how does God reveal things as a creator? The world is kind of the place he expresses himself. So people, places, things, events are ways that God expresses himself. 2, describe the process of learning to read. As kids, we're taught how not to just look at things like ink, but to look along them for meaning. So a blob of ink when you're little is just a weird splash of color. But as you get older, you're taught that that particular blob of ink is actually a symbol, that it's a word. And so you learn to look along it. Okay, so as kids, we're taught not just to look at things like ink, but to look along them to understand meaning in words on a paper. Because there's an author, we need to be taught to look for what he means to say. And this is gradual. Because the world has an author, we need to be taught to look for meaning. And we do that gradually over time. We learn it. So 3, describe how can the progress of reading be stalled? Just like as a kid, if you don't have good models, role models, if you don't have encouragement or exposure to books, it'll take you a long time to read and you might not even enjoy it or see the value of it. Number 4, how does reading relate to creation? God authored creation before he inspired the Bible. Creation, the universe, the world, the natural world, is a story that is not clear or complete, but it's part of the gradual process of learning to look for meaning through natural revelation. So creation, even though it's not clear or complete, is part of the way, it's like a kid's book where God is inviting us to learn to read, to understand something about him. Number 5, why does natural revelation require divine revelation? Natural revelation is like a kid's book. It can't communicate everything. What it can do is reveal that there's an author, but can also lead you to incorrect conclusions about him. Like a picture book, for adults, picture books is like too easy because there's nothing to think about. But for kids, picture books are a different way of learning, and there's a lot of ways you can misunderstand as a kid what that picture means. So in the same way, natural revelation, like a kid's book, can't communicate everything. It can reveal that there's an author, but can also lead to incorrect conclusions. So we need direct knowledge. that completes and corrects the story of creation. Unit 1, Lesson 5. So I don't know if you noticed this, these last few lessons. So we went from desire, creation, and conscience, the 3 ways natural revelation works. And so we're on conscience. What is our conscience? It's the interior dialogue of man with himself about right and wrong. It's a witness of God calling us to obey the natural law or the moral law. Conscience is the interior dialogue with man to himself about right and wrong. It's the witness of God calling us to obey the moral law. What does it do? Conscience is the natural ability of reason to do 3 things. Okay, so it's the ability of reason to do 3 things. Remind us to do good and avoid evil. So it reminds us ahead of time. It helps us to make judgments about particular things. And after the fact, it bears witness to whether we've done good or we've done evil. That's the guilty conscience part. So it does things. It reminds us ahead of time, good and bad. In the moment, it helps us make a particular choice for good. After the fact, it bears witness whether our choice was good or evil, leading to a clear conscience or a guilty conscience. Number 3, what does following our conscience demand from each one of us? Because our conscience is our compass. We have an obligation to form our conscience. And well-formed consciences make it easier to do good. So a well-formed conscience makes it easier to do good. We call that a good habit or a virtue. Number 4, what does the Bible say about our conscience? Our conscience can be deformed because of original sin, personal sin, confusion, and error. So we can have a deformed conscience because of original sin, my own choices to sin, human confusion, and just mistakes. Number 5, where can we look to form our conscience? We can look for the wisdom of others, experts, in areas of life like biology, the church's teachings, practices, examples from the lives of saints who lived and died good lives, and through prayer and the scriptures. So wisdom of others, experts, church's teachings, practices, examples from saints, prayer, and scripture. And I'll talk a little bit at the end of this about this vocab list, okay? So again, I'm going to talk about this vocab list later. I'm going to go into Unit 2. All right, Unit 2, Lesson 1. Why is humility, that's the objective, humility important when discussing God's existence? So let's talk about that. Number 1, what are the 4 questions to ask before talking about God's existence? The 4 questions are, can something exist even if we don't know about it? Of course, right? Question 2 of the 4 questions to ask. Okay, so question 1, can something exist if we don't know about it? Number 2, are our reasons for believing, are they good reasons? Number 3, are our reasons for believing based on proofs or probabilities? And number 4, does proofs for God's existence need to be scientific proofs? So let me quickly answer those questions. Can something exist whether we know about it or not? Yes. Gravity existed before we were able to explain it. Are our reasons for believing things good reasons? I hope so. Are your reasons for believing God good reasons? Are they good enough for you? Number 3, are our reasons based on proofs or probabilities? Like every day I come in and I sit on a chair. I don't have proof that the chair is trustworthy. It's going to hold me up. I just have probability. Most chairs have been good to me. And so I've got a high probability that this chair too will be good to me today. And lastly, does proofs for God's existence need to be scientific proofs? And that's the key question there. Number 3, why are these questions important? It's really simple. These questions put you in a posture of humility. They make you open to receiving. You're teachable. These questions help you realize that you might be wrong on a lot of things, and it makes you humble enough to approach the question of God with an open mind, regardless of where you are in terms of what you believe. Number 3, what can arguments do for a believer or a non-believer? For a believer or a non-believer, arguments help us provide good reasons. For a believer, it helps us to go deeper into a relationship with God. For everybody, it can challenge us on our beliefs, teach us to respect people and treat ideas seriously. They also reveal our worldviews, and they remind us that God isn't a problem to solve, but ultimately a mystery to enter into, right? God isn't like developing a new math formula where once I solve it, I could put it away and move on. God is, because he's a person, he is somebody that these questions can ultimately be asked not about him. They're like questions that we can ask actually to him. All right, Unit 2, Lesson 2. Worldviews. What are worldviews? These are the things that now get in the way of answering the question of does God exist? Our worldview can be a problem. So what are worldviews? The collective way a person understands reality and interprets data. It's the way principles interact with values in my decision making. Okay. That's how my principles and values interact when I make decisions. Principles are the things that kind of believe govern reality. Values are the things that I think are important and how they interact when I make everyday decisions. Okay, 5, how can worldviews be tested? I'm going to simplify that part of my notes and say worldviews can be tested by asking if your worldview is logical, factual, and livable. Logical, does it make sense? Factual, does it actually fit the world we're actually living in? And is it livable? Is it something that actually works right now in this moment, not just in the past or not just in some distant future? The next question, what questions do worldviews attempt to answer or address? The questions are questions of origin, where I come from, where we come from. Okay. The next one is meaning. Why am I here? What's the purpose of life? The next question is morality. How do I know the difference between good and bad? And then another question is destiny. It's the opposite of the origin. It's where am I going? What happens when I die? And the last one is how do I make decisions? How do I make everyday normal decisions? Okay. So again, the questions are about origin, meaning, morality, destiny, and decision making. All right. Unit 2, Lesson 3. What are principles? Principles are unchanging realities of the natural world that govern consequences. Principles are objective and external and discovered through reason to help form our conscience. So, like a principle, cheaters never win or prosper in the long run. If that's a principle, it's an unchanging reality that governs consequences. So if you value cheating and getting ahead, right? The principle that the world is built on will ultimately says that somewhere you will be caught, and the consequence of this principle will always fall on you. No matter who you are, cheaters never prosper. So, and this is objective, so it has nothing to do based on your opinion. It just is how the world runs. And therefore, it helps us form our conscience. All right, number 2. What is the principle of sufficient reason, and why is it important? The principle of sufficient reason is that our intuition and common sense tells us that everything that comes into existence has a cause. So if something was once not here and kind of showed up in the world, like people, stars, planets, energy, whatever, if something comes into existence, it must have a cause for coming to be. There are three kinds of causes. So if you're in your room at night and you hear noise, right? Something that sounds terrifying downstairs. The principle of sufficient reason says you search for a cause. The first cause you look for is physical, right? You look for burglars or animals or somebody downstairs falling. The next cause is psychological. Are you sure you heard that? Could it be in your mind? If you can rule out a physical cause and a psychological cause, the last cause is supernatural. If you skip looking for physical causes and psychological causes and you always go to the supernatural cause, you become superstitious. If you think there are only physical and psychological causes, you end up becoming falling into scientism. So all three causes in this order are important. Like when we talk about the church investigating miracles, the church first looks for possible causes or demonic possessions. We look for possible causes in this order. So we avoid superstition and scientism. So common sense intuition tells us that everything that comes into existence has a cause, a physical, psychological, or supernatural cause. It's important to investigate things in the proper order to avoid superstition and scientism. Let's go on to Unit 2, Lesson 4. What are Aristotle's four causes? All right. When investigating cause and effect, there are four answers to what caused something, right? There's the material cause. Material cause is that from which something is made. So the material cause of a house could be bricks and mortar and wood. Then there's the efficient cause, that by which something is made. So what took the bricks and the mortar and the wood and put it all together? So the efficient cause could be the workers, the tools that the workers use to put a house together. Next, we have the formal cause, that into which something is made. So what was the reason for all the materials and all the tools to interact to make this thing? It was because they were trying to make a house, right? It's like the formal cause is kind of like what was the outline of it. The final cause is that the final cause is that for the sake of which something is made. So why was there an outline for a house? Because somebody desired a space to live in. So what caused the house? You can say the material cause. The thing that caused the house was the ingredients, the pieces of the house that were put together. Or you can say it was the efficient cause. It was the tools and the people that built it is what caused the house. Or you could say the formal cause. It was the design of a house that put the tools and the people and made a house. Or you can ultimately say it's the final cause. The house was made because someone wanted a place to live. Okay. Number two, why do all four causes matter? Okay. And I kind of left a clue here. The first two causes can be known to our reason, and science can study them. So science could study the material cause and the efficient cause. Science could study the ingredients and the things that put ingredients together. So for a house, we can study the items that the house are made from, and we could study the things that are made to make those items into a house, the machines and the tools. So those are really important for science. The last two causes can also be known by reason, but science can't study them. Remember, reason is bigger than science. So the formal cause is the design or the blueprint in the mind or on paper. It's the essence or nature of whatever that thing is. The final cause is the purpose for why the house was made. because someone wanted to live there. It's the reason it's created for. Ultimately, to understand the final cause means that you have to understand that the ultimate purpose for everything is God desired it. Let's see. I think that's good. All right, let's go to Unit 2, Lesson 5. What are St. Thomas Aquinas' 5 ways? This is from your textbook. There's I forgot the page number, but there's a page. It's like one of those pages in gold. It's like an aside, but it's on Thomas's 5 ways. The first one, I'm going to really briefly just go over it. The first one is the argument for motion. This simply means that things are in motion and must be set in motion. So if something is moving, something else has to move it. And ultimately, if the whole world requires things to move it, there has to be something that can move everything, but not need something to move it. If that makes sense. God is the unmoved mover. He is the thing. It's like everything in a domino rally needs something else to knock it over. What about the first piece? The first piece, to be the first piece, must be moved by something that is not requiring another piece, right? So if something is the first domino, it needs something that's not a domino, that doesn't need another domino to knock it over. It needs that to knock the first domino down. That's the argument for motion. The next one is the argument from causes. Nothing can cause itself to exist. So if something exists, it must be caused by another thing. So if something shows up in existence, if something has other things that it needs to make it exist, the whole world seems to need a first cause, an uncaused cause. Again, think of the dominoes. If every domino needs another domino, there has to be a first domino that's knocked over, that is completely independent. So God is the first cause, the uncaused cause. God is the thing that causes other things, but needs nothing to cause himself, by definition. C, the argument of possibility and necessity. If a thing has the possibility of existing, then it will in time cease to exist. So Joe Philip has the possibility of existing. Therefore, if you wait long enough, I will exist, and at some point I'll stop existing. If the sun has the possibility of existing, if you wait long enough in the universe, the sun will come to existence. And then, given time, it'll stop existing. Think of every plant, every animal, every idea. If you only had enough time, every possible thing would have existed, and because if you wait long enough, it'll stop existing. So this argument of possibility and necessity means this. Anything with possibility is unnecessary. If it only has the possibility of existing, it's not necessary to exist. God, therefore, is the only necessary thing that gives other possible things their existence. Because Joe Philip is only a possibility at one point in time, he's not necessary to the universe, which is why, if you wait long enough, Joe Philip won't exist in the same way. But the whole world is filled with everything like that. Everything is only a possibility, and if you wait long enough, it'll stop existing. So it's unnecessary. So why, if everything is unnecessary, why is there anything at all? Why is there Joe Philip? Why is there sun, moon, stars, planets, molecules, and energy? God, the only necessary being, is what gives all other possible beings their option, their existence. All right. The argument from degrees of perfection. God is the only perfect being and is the standard of our degrees of perfection. So when you kind of look at something and say good, better, best, we're ultimately talking about this invisible standard of perfection, and God is the perfect on that standard. Next is the argument from governance. Pretty much this. The universe is not completely chaotic. And for some weird reason, our brains were made to understand how the world works. Therefore, okay, here's the definition. The intelligibility in the universe can't come from blind forces. The universe is filled with order as a result of God's intelligence. So, if you found a watch on the floor, your mind, even if you don't know exactly how to use it or work it or whatever, you know that there's intelligence to it. It wasn't random. It's not chaotic. And therefore, what you found, this watch, filled with intelligence and moving pieces that work together, must be made by something intelligent. So the universe has order in its chaos, and that order must come from the intelligence of a creator, not just chaos. 2, what are the necessary vocabulary terms? The vocab terms for this, again, I'm going to get to vocab in a different video. So for this one, we'll come back to the necessary terms. Okay. I'm going to stop here with this video because it's running long, and I'll do the units 3 and 4 on the next video, part 2. All right. Thanks. Peace.